7:14. When I change some stuff.
Good. And there's a website where you can find out more, and it's in the East Madrone room in Martin Luther King Center. On Thursday night, Peace Corps is very challenging. My son just finished up 2 years of Peace Corps and decided to stay in his country, which was Nicaragua. So also he got married. So it just shows you some of the things that can happen when you join the Peace Corps. It doesn't have all Peace Corps volunteers, but some. The other announcement is that the website that I told you about before, www.metacenter.org, is now fully operational. Let me put it up here. This isn't our class, right? And we hope to Meta Center that it would be very useful for people like you in this class. And so if you have other, if you see things that it should have or things that are unclear, we want this to be interactive, and there's a blog, and there's a way that you can, this is the 21st century, so you can get back to us and let us know how it's working for you. And in addition to the website, we also have fantastic t-shirts. We're getting this on the way now. And this is going to be a bumper sticker also that you can send back to your folks. So let me get redressed here for the rest of that. I'd like to talk a little bit about something that came up last time. I think I made a mistake. There was a question about are we American citizens vis-a-vis the war in Iraq, are we in an emergency situation of the type that we're describing in this class? And I got carried away and said yes, but it's not true. We are not in a situation which requires the use of violence. We're not there yet. We have two audiences, the general public, which can still be reached by education, especially now. Let's not make any mistakes about the general public in the U.S. right now. What they are experiencing is not a revulsion against war. They are not against war. They're against losing. But we can take this energy, this consciousness, momentum, and turn it to an anti-war consciousness. And that should be done by normal means of persuasion. But in terms of reaching, oh, very good, okay. In terms of reaching policymakers, they cannot be persuaded. They already told us that. As you probably guessed, we're going to see a film in a little while. Policymakers, however, have proudly announced that they cannot be reached by reason. So the reason I got excited and said, yes, this is an emergency, is because of my famous model. Can we get the sideboard on the camera if I? Okay. Of course. Here it is. I'll tell you what, let's just do it here. We'll put it under the Meta Center. Yeah. As all of you know, because you've already read my book, on page 108 of that book, I make an attempt to be perceived as a scientist in vain hopes of being fully funded and getting the Nobel Prize at some point. And I have this famous diagram of the escalation of conflict and how it proceeds smoothly, but you can, for purposes of knowing how to react nonviolently, it's convenient to divide it into three phases. And the first phase is what you might call the head phase, where people can be persuaded by reason. And that's the phase we're in regarding much of the general public, which is confused, see nothing but advertising all day long, and they don't know where to go. They could be reached by reason and passion and argumentation. And high school debate coaches know all about this. But there comes a stage, Gandhi was very clear about this, when reason just doesn't work anymore, and then you need satyagraha, and that we might call the heart region, because he said things of fundamental importance cannot be gained through appeals to reason alone. It cannot be gained through petition. You have to be able to move the heart also. And I find it convenient to designate still a third stage where things have gone so far, you have been so dehumanized in the eyes of your opponents and people you're trying to persuade, awaken, that you really have to lay down your life. You have to risk your life. It doesn't mean you have to die, but it does mean you have to be prepared to die. And that gives you a certain amount of power. I'm fond of describing, and A students will forgive me for repeating this ad nauseum, but one of my best friends, Dan Ellsberg, is the person who released the Pentagon Papers, and he was sitting there with those papers, which would show the country that the president was lying about the Vietnam War. He was sitting there with those papers and asking himself the question, what will happen to me if I go public with these? And when he asked that question, he conjured up all kinds of horrible things that would happen to him, and he got paralyzed and he couldn't do it. But one day, mostly under the gentle persuasion of Patricia Ellsberg, instead of putting the question that way, he said to himself, what could I do if I were willing to go to jail? And that immediately opened it up. He said, oh, I could do this, I could do that. And the next thing you knew, he was walking across the street with those 70,000 pages and putting them out in Xerox copies to all major newspapers. So what I'm saying is not that you want to die, but there's a great deal of power that comes from your willingness to die. And in terms of this administration, we're somewhere back here, I would say, on this. So it needs direct opposition and concrete measures. Yeah, there's a seat right back there. So I don't think that we're in a state where we need to use violence. That's only in extreme last-minute physical emergencies, and it's interesting that Gandhi, who invented this idea that it would be nonviolent to dispatch a lunatic with a sword who's rushing through the village, he invented this idea in he lived to be about 78, he worked probably 60 years in the forefront of nonviolent action, never had to invoke this principle, never had to actually do it. So it's just there theoretically so that you know a point can come way up on the curve where you have to even use lethal force. But it's interesting to know about theoretically, but it doesn't really, it's not a model for us. Don't need to worry about it. Yeah. That's even past satyagraha. I'm saying sacrifice for this part out here. But even here, do note that this has nothing to do with that lunatic with the sword either, because I'm not talking about killing somebody. I'm talking about being ready to die. You know that famous line in the movie when I say the movie up to the end of January, it means Attenborough's Gandhi movie. What's going to change in February is that a friend of mine has done a major documentary on Abdul Ghaffar Khan, and it's going to be screened somewhere in LA in February, and I'm going to see if I can wheedle her with persuasion. I probably won't have to go on hunger strike, but I'd like to get her to let us have the film up here. So, anyway, in the movie, you remember in that famous scene in the September 11th, 1906, the Empire Theater, Gandhi, what he actually said is not accurate in the movie, but it's true to type, where he says, I too am willing, this is a cause for which I too am willing to die, but there is no cause for which I'm willing to kill. So that's a whole separate thing. It's not even on this chart. Okay, so I got excited and nervous and went over to the chart, but what I should have said was, no, this is not that kind of emergency for any of us yet. Now, on this, yeah, question. No, as I say, that would be off this chart. This would be such an extreme emergency that I have to use lethal force in order to protect life. And I've been putting this out there. There's plenty of lunatics in Berkeley. Any one of them could have taken me up on it and tried, come into the class with a gun, but they never have. So what I'm saying is it's very unlikely that that would ever happen. Now, when people hear about that deranged lunatic exception, they say, well, that's what we're doing with war, right? The country's attacked, suddenly you go and defend it. But no, because you have to do a huge lot of preparation to get that defense ready. Now, if you have time to prepare, you have a choice to prepare violence or nonviolence. And Gandhi actually wanted India to be prepared to resist what they thought was an impending Japanese invasion by nonviolent means. We'll talk about exactly how that would work later on in the semester. But it occurred to me that there's an interesting model here. We're never going to get through everything I want to say, but at a key point I will stop and we'll see the film. If you compare two cases, we're comparing Algiers and India, saying there were very similar insurrections, but one of them used nonviolence and the other would use violence, roughly speaking. The one that used nonviolence, very, very low rate of injury and very, very good relationship with the previously colonial country, namely Britain, whereas in Algiers you had a drastic number of people killed, and the relations between Algerians and the French are not all that great, even to this day. And Algiers is not a democracy, which has something to do with the fact that they chose violence as a means of liberating themselves from colonial rule or anything else. So that was a good kind of comparison. Now I want to throw out another comparison here. When Gandhi was in Switzerland in 1931, he made public what he called his Thermopylae model. Thermopylae was a battle in the history of ancient Greece where a small force of Peloponnesian soldiers tried to prevent an enormous Persian army from coming through the pass at Thermopylae and invading Greece. And they became great heroes. There's a poem of, I knew I should have started this. There's a two-line poem of Simonides which goes, Oak, Sain, Angalain, Patilakadaimani, Oisati Heda, Hamath, Kano, Hippo, Rainasi, Patanoi. O friend who passes by my gravestone here, go and report back to the Lacedaemonians that we lie here in obedience to their commands. Those are the Lacedaemonian soldiers who died at that pass. Okay, so that's our literary lapse for the week. I got that out of our system. Let's go back to the model. Gandhi invokes this, saying that if the Japanese were to invade India or someone were to invade your country, what you can do is go up to the border, men, women, and children, and stand there and try physically to resist them. Then people say, but they get killed. I said, yes, you get killed. But any army that killed unresisting men, women, and children, he said, would not be able to repeat the experiment. Thank you. In other words, they'd be so revolted by their own behavior that they wouldn't be able to do that again. You say, this is drastic, this is costly. Can't help it. They're invading our country. This is a drastic emergency. On the other hand, in commenting on the Polish defense in, I guess, 1940 when the Germans invaded Poland, the Polish army made a spirited attempt to defend the country. And Gandhi was asked how he felt about that. And he said, I'm willing to call this almost nonviolence. Why? Because the Poles knew that they would be crushed to atoms. They were absolutely no match for the invading Wehrmacht. But they decided it was more honorable to go down fighting than to just give up their country. So he called that almost nonviolence. And he's calling the Thermopylae defense nonviolence. What do you think makes for a difference between the two cases? This is kind of subtle. Yeah. I think in a way they did not have the choice, or to put it in another way, they didn't know they had that choice. If you don't know that nonviolence is a possibility, then basically it's not available for you, and you've got to use the next best thing. And as we know, violence is better than cowardice. I must have said that about a dozen times last semester. And so he had admiration, not just grudging admiration, but real admiration for what the Poles had done. But if he had been able to get into that country, say a year before the German invasion, and start talking about nonviolence, it would have been a very different story. Then you would have had what you had in Moscow in 1991, where they prevented the coup attempt through nonviolent means. And the journalists all say, "Oh, this is amazing. Where did this come from? Never heard of it. What lucky thing." Well, I have a friend, as you probably know, who was in Russia doing 2 nonviolence workshops a day, every day all summer before that thing happened. So it was not luck; it was training. But that's the difference. In the Thermopylae case, he's talking to people with enough advance warning before it happens that they can train themselves to do this third stage. Whereas in the Polish case, bang, it happened. And I remember a lot of people talking about France during World War II and saying, did they do wrong to try to fight back against the Germans? And they know ils ont été lancés. They were plunged into it. They had no opportunity to do anything else. Okay, well, let me tell you what I was going to do. And then since we have all this equipment here, we have to do something else. I wanted to go over those 2 1/4 pages about the overthrow of Maximiliano Hernandez Martinez and give you to do that for 2 reasons. Fill in the background about what this era was like in this hemisphere, and also to go over the details that we can get out of Patricia Parkman's description of the event. So what we're going to do instead, because this is an hour video, it's called The Good War and Those Who Refuse to Fight It. It's about World War II conscientious objectors in the U.S. What we're going to do is we'll just see the video, and as you're watching it, just make note of anything salient in your mind that you think is worthy of comment. Then what I'll do is I'll talk about the things to get out of the Patricia Parkman essay to give you an example of how to use reportage to get nonviolent information out of it, and then I'll turn it over to you to say, what did you notice in this movie? Dynamics, any interesting comments? Okay, the point of the movie is that this was the most inspiring patriotic war that the country has ever fought. It is still a model for every war that the country fights, this country. That's why President Bush Sr., when he launched the merciless bombing of Iraq in 91, he went on the air and said, the liberation of Kuwait has begun. Now, why did he do that? Because he wanted people to think that this was World War II and we were liberating Europe from the Nazis. And people do think that because people think what is comfortable for them to think, I'm afraid. That's a problem that we're going to have to deal with a lot. So here you had the most engaging war that the country could possibly be fighting. It looked as if we were suddenly attacked by these two other countries. Don't get me started on what was going on and what George Bush's grandfather was doing with Hitler. That'll have to be another seminar somewhere. And it takes me several hours to cool down after I tell that story, so we're not going to get into it here. But most people in the country thought that America was innocent and it just was under attack. And yet there were 6,000 people who felt that they would rather go to jail than to fight, even in that war. And that's what this film is about. Okay, so John, could you now get it started and just push play? I think I can do that. Okay, this is the one. Okay. Okay. Thank you. So I was saying that David Dellinger and a lot of these other people became parts of a loose movement. It never was an organization, but a movement called radical pacifism, and it fed the anti-war movements, Korea, Vietnam, and sort of it's a little bit hard to see where it is right now. One thing that always strikes me when I see this movie is Steve Carey saying at the beginning that you knew that there was this horrible menace. You knew that war was the wrong answer, but you did not have another answer. This is the really tremendous importance of nonviolence. We could get people to understand it, how it applies in every conceivable situation. That is the other answer. And of course, it's an extremely noble thing to refuse to go along with the wrong answer, but unless you can come up with the right answer, it's really not going to turn the world around. Okay, so what else? What did you notice? What comments or what else, Shannon? Yes, that was David Dellinger. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly how I reacted to that too. You know, here we have this idea that you have to be willing to lay down your life. Here's someone, David Dellinger, is not in a position of in a situation of immediate risk, and yet mentally he completely goes through the possibility of what if he died, and he comes out of it very much like what Dan Ellsberg did. Okay, if I'm willing to do it, okay, I'm willing to do it. Then what? And then his whole life is enriched actually, and then he feels that he's very much empowered. This is not to be confused with throwing your life away, certainly not to be confused with taking it or anything like that. But as you say with detachment, Shannon, say if you stop clinging to your personal life, an amazing amount of power comes into your hands. I'm not recommending it. I'm just saying if A, then B. Yeah, Sid. Yeah. Yeah. Right. This for me is really the most important point in the film, and there's kind of two stages to it. First, the government tries to punish them or show them that they're doing the wrong thing by congregating them in prison. And what you have is these 7,000 men who hardly knew each other, in most cases didn't know each other at all. They became a movement. And in two stages, they were forced to work through their convictions and really think about it. It's not just a gut reaction, a knee-jerk reaction anymore, but why am I in here? You have to face that with all these other people. And out of that crucible, Bill Sutherland uses a very good word there, out of that crucible, they really became a movement. And now what you're saying, Sid, and I completely agree with it, is, okay, even if you don't have a positive alternative, if you can say no to the wrong answer, a positive alternative will slowly develop out of that. And it's amazing how they see these opportunities coming up for them. The entire NIMH, the National Institute of Mental Health, they've never funded me, but still, they're a pretty good outfit. It's a part of American life now, and it came out of just one decision of these few people insisting on doing something useful. Finally, they plugged them into these bedlams. And, we grow up not having any idea what those places were like and what kind of a blot against humanity it was to have them in every state. So there's the NIMH, there's the radical pacifism movement, and then there's the desegregation of the federal prison system. Well, now imagine how much more powerful it would have been if these people had planned that ahead of time, had known that they could go forward towards these things rather than just away from them. Well, I don't know, some of the best things that have ever been accomplished by nonviolence have been more or less by accident. Once you make the one right choice, everything else follows. Yeah, anything else? Yeah, Matt.